All right. So thanks very much for the introduction. This is joint work with my colleague Giancarlo, currently at Stanford, Frank from Berkeley, as well as Michael and Christian from CISPA. So the main motivation for our work originates from prior work that both Frank and I presented last year at Usenix, trying to notify administrators about problems that they had in their websites and their server systems. And the general problem was that we had very low fix rates. And both papers found that the main issue was that we did not manage to reach people in the first place so they could even kind of look at the information. So in this paper, we continued this line of research and tried to understand why notifications did not perform better, and also tried to come up with better ways of doing such notifications. That is, we varied the message format and the message tone, and also compared it to what I'd call high-effort channels, that is, even calling people on the phone. Okay, let me first talk a little bit about the study setup and the types of vulnerabilities that we looked at. So we decided in the beginning to use 3 different types of vulnerabilities. The first one was 2 vulnerabilities in WordPress, which affected about 15,000 domains. These were cross-site scripting vulnerabilities, and those could be determined merely by retrieving a resource from the server and comparing a hash sum. So we didn't have to do any intrusive testing. The second type of vulnerability that we looked at were misconfigured Git repositories. So in this case, people left their Git repositories in their web root, allowing an attacker to download the complete source code of that website. This affected about 10,000 domains, and we could check that by merely looking at this Git config file, checking for the format. And to avoid some false positives, we also looked at the last hash, or the hash of the last commit, and checked that on GitHub so as to exclude public repositories. The third type of vulnerability we considered initially, of problem, were core dumps. So 800 domains had core dumps lying around in their web roots. It turned out that later in the experiment that about 30% of the affected websites were actually hosted by a single provider. So that really tainted our analysis, so we had to exclude these domains later on. So I said in the beginning that we tried to do this notification with different message formats. So we used 3 tier types of plain text mails. The first one was, dubbed plain, is just my name as the sender. Then, as an alternative, we used vulnerability notification as the sender name, but had the same message content. And the third type was then, again, my name, but this time signing the emails with a valid SMIME certificate so people could verify, that we were for real. The second type of messages that we used were HTML emails. So here you see on the right-hand side of the slide an example of such an HTML email. The first one included all the information, so that is also the logo from CISPA here. And the second email, we exchanged that logo, which was part of the email, to an externally linked resource. I'm not going to sugarcoat it, we did tracking. Okay, so we wanted to know whether people open our email or not. And as a third type, we then used what we called a friendly tone. So this is the message that we used. So rather than saying, you have the following problems, we contacted people, said, we found a problem, we would like to disclose this, could you please get us in contact with the right person? And in order to then verify that somebody actually received our information, the emails that we sent contained unique links, so people could view their information, for their website on our web interface, allowing us to count that somebody actually looked at the report. And for friendly, we marked them as being reached when they replied to us, and we sent them back the report. The procedure for the notification was as follows. So we used directly available communication channels. So that is these 4 aliases at domain.com, as well as the whois abuse contact. We split up the data set into 7 groups, 6 notification groups and 1 control group, to measure the impact of our analysis of a notification. And we sent bi-weekly emails, 1 initial email and 2 reminders to those people that had not yet reacted on our initial email. So let's have a brief look at the high-level overview of the results in terms of fix rates. This is what you see here on the left-hand side for Git. So the dotted line is the control group, and you can even see this from a far distance. All these groups are, notably better and also statistically significantly better than the control group. We also see, and this is a little bit hard to read here, that the friendly channel that we used is actually the least effective one in this case, but significant improvements for all the groups. The same thing we did for WordPress, and here we don't see that big of a difference. The control group is right there with all the others. It turns out that in this case, actually only this mail bot led to a significant improvement in fix rates. And also friendly is somewhere in the middle there, so didn't perform too well. The point I'm trying to make with friendly is if we look now at the reports that were accessed over time, we see here that actually for the Git vulnerabilities, friendly is the best channel. And the same thing applies also for WordPress. Sorry for the contrast. Might actually be the wrong slide deck. Anyways. But for both types, we see that friendly allowed us to reach the most people, but that did not turn into the best remediation rate that we saw previously. Other than that, we also saw that the plain text emails are pretty closely grouped together, so it didn't really make a difference whether we signed the email, we used a vulnerability notification sender name or real name, it more or less is all the same. And the last class is then the HTML emails that are well below the others. This can be, at least in my understanding, explained by the fact that if you send an HTML email, a spam filter will already assign a slightly higher spam score just because it's HTML, so probably more emails got stuck in the spam filter here. In the beginning, I said that we used this tracking, and I didn't want to sugarcoat it, and I feel confident in not doing this because this tracking allowed us to gain a number of interesting insights, which I want to talk to you about now. So first, in terms of spam filtering, we did an experiment or analysis where we, for each of the domains that we sent emails to, determined for how many domains we could successfully track somebody based on the mail exchange that we sent the emails to. And the results are shown here on the right-hand side. So for mails that were delivered to a Google mail server, we only had about a 10% hit rate on the tracking pixel, whereas for Microsoft, so these are companies that host their email services with Outlook.com, we had about 45%, and for others we had 40%. So this leads us to believe that Google employs much more strict spam filtering rules. We initially thought this might be due to the fact that maybe Google does not automatically download these external resources, but the default settings for Gmail is to always download external resources as long as an email is in the inbox and not in the spam folder. Secondly, we wanted to understand kind of the conversion rates from this whole pipeline of notifying people. Here we see that we have similar rates of emails being read, again, in the sense of the tracking pixel being hit. About a third of the people, of the domains that we notified actually opened our email, and about 25% or so for WordPress. So this also presents only a lower bound because there are definitely people that do not automatically retrieve external resources, but we can only speculate how big the fraction is actually. More interestingly, however, if we now look at those people that did get an email and then followed up on the technical information that we provided over our web interface, we see a bigger difference. So for Git, about a third of those people that did, of the people that did get our email followed up on the information, whereas for WordPress, it was just 1 in 6 people that followed up. And the last interesting analysis that we did was to try and figure out, so once somebody has viewed the report, are they able to fix the problem? And this is shown here. The yellow bars denote those domains that fixed once they had viewed a report. And we see that for Git, about 3/4 of the domains could fix the problem after viewing the report. For WordPress, it was just a third. But what I find even more interesting is if we look at the other 2 columns here, these are those domains that did not view a report, but that did get our email. They were tracked compared to the control group. And here we observe that actually for Git, it was sufficient to just, in some cases, tell people that they had a problem related to Git, and they were able to fix it without following up on any technical information. Whereas for WordPress, there's really no difference between the control group, which we didn't notify at all, and people who did get the email but didn't follow up on the technical information. Okay. So let me now talk a little bit about this whole pipeline and some parameters that we identified. So initially, we have a large body of messages that we're trying to send. And out of these, a couple will bounce. About 15% of the domains just don't have any emails that you can deliver mail to. About a third or so is opened by the recipient. And then we have another big chunk, which is the unknowns. So we don't know whether somebody didn't want to open the email. It ended up in the spam folder. We can only speculate where this went. From there, then a number of people follow up on the information. So this is split between Git and WordPress because the ratios differ quite a bit. So here we see already that judging from this much that we started with, we're already at a much smaller amount of domains that actually followed up to read the report. And then even further, fixing the problem. For WordPress, it was even too small to still put the text in there to say issue fixed. And so bottom line is the 3 parameters that we identified are the email reading rate, and this is not really related to the type of vulnerability that we're disclosing. The awareness raising rate, so how many people then actually followed up on the information. This does depend on the type of vulnerability that we're notifying. And then this awareness to fix rate that eventually, well, gets the issue fixed in for good. Okay. So the second thing that we did is do a manual notification. So we tried to assess whether this would be more suited than this fully automated approach using this generic email addresses. To that end, we initially randomly sampled 1,000 domains. We removed 30 because these were from the core dumps that we excluded later in the experiment. And we only took those domains that were unfixed and had not viewed the report, so for which we were quite confident that we had not reached them yet. And for each site, we, or actually students of mine, took a lot of time to then go to those websites and look for additional contact information, that is a postal address, an email address, some web forms, social media, or even a phone number. And on a high level, you see the results on this, for this on the right-hand side of this slide. The most important thing that I want you to take away from this is that for 90% of the domains, we could identify at least one channel that was there, okay? But since we didn't want to bias ourselves in kind of how we would notify domains, and I mean, maybe as an example, if a website has a phone number, it might be a company. If it's a company, there's likely more kind of security staff. So we didn't want to bias that by selecting these channels based on their availability for a given domain, but rather for each domain we said, okay, we randomly select one channel. If it's not there, we don't notify. If it is there, then we notify over that channel. So in total, we contacted about 360 domains. And in doing so, we again hit a number of roadblocks. So the first thing, this is actually the physical bounces that we got back. About a third of the mail that we sent got bounced back to us. The second problem that we had, this is the flowchart that we use for our phone calls. It's a little hard to read, but on the very top it says, do you speak English? And this already was a problem every now and then for contacting some people. And also, so I did this together with my colleague Giancarlo, and when he called people in the US, for some reason they didn't want to trust him. Interestingly, this was only true for male people that he talked to. If he talked with his Italian accent to females, they did trust him and did want to get more information. And last but not least, this is an image from my Facebook outbox from last week. So yes, people have social media accounts, but then again, they don't read their messages there either, so didn't really help at all. Okay, so high-level results. We spent 60 hours of work, 40 hours to get all this information, and then another 20 hours of notifications, plus obviously postage, phone bills, and so on. And in reaching people, this graph shows the comparison between the different channels that we used and the comparison to the best automated one. So we see here that for phone and postal, we managed to reach about a quarter of the sites that we tried to notify, whereas for the best automated channel, we only reached about 12%. So this seemed to be, well, useful. For WordPress, the numbers are slightly smaller, but still we have an improvement over this automated approach. However, if we then look at the fixes, there's no real improvement. So we spent a lot of time. It was a lot of fun, but still it didn't really help that much in the long haul. One thing needs to be considered here, and I want to be honest about this. There's a certain bias because we only contacted those domains that had not reacted in the first place. So this was kind of a snafu that we did, but that couldn't be rectified after the fact. Still, I think this provides valuable insights. Okay, before I finish my talk and open the room up for questions, I want to kind of point out where we can go next from here. So on the one hand side, we saw that we definitely need better delivery mechanisms. As an example, the security alias bounced for 85% of the domains. So here, it's definitely up to the domain administrators to register that email address. And also, we saw that Google spam filter likely had a very significant impact on the success of our notification because it swallowed so many of our emails. The second thing that I want to point out is we need to somehow increase the trust in the notifications. Only between 1/6 and 1/4 of all people followed up on a notification. And prior work using also the Google Search Console to notify webmasters about compromise yielded 80% reactions. So there's definitely room for improvement here. And last but not least, we need tailored notifications. So the fact that there's only a third of WordPress sites that fixed after they got our information is not their fault. I'd argue it's our fault because maybe we didn't phrase what they should do properly. So there, I think, is interesting research questions coming up. Okay, let me briefly summarize my talk. So we did this analysis of different notification channels. We found that this friendly channel seemed to work quite well in terms of reaching people. It did not have any effect in terms of fixes all over. We identified these 3 parameters to the success of a notification campaign, and also did this manual analysis where we figured that for 60 hours of work, it wasn't really worth the outcome at this point. Obviously, since this is a very short talk, there's more information, including also a survey of the people that we notified in the paper. I'd like to thank you very much for your questions. And also, if reviewer C is around and you still have that question regarding language, please come up to the mic and ask. We couldn't put that in the paper due to space restrictions, but I have some backup slides to answer this question.
Hi there. Thank you for this. It's great to see someone actually trying to fix. Yeah. I'm sorry?
Are you reviewer C? That's what the
I am not
was.
reviewer
Okay.
C, no.
You don't have to de-anonymize yourself. You can just send somebody else to ask the language question.
So if you could back up to where you were talking about the tracking, I was trying to understand. There were a couple of points where it looked like you were maybe conflating with loaded the tracking pixel with, or loading the tracking picture with actually read your mail. And I was trying to distinguish between those 2 cases.
Okay.
So, or maybe it would help to distinguish between the six categories. Was only one of those categories tracked?
Yes. So we only did the tracking basically for one of those 6 notified groups. And tracking, so we did already filter out those hits that we believed were not from a regular email client. So for example, we saw that emails, so the tracking pixel was hit before the mail server even had accepted the email and said, okay, I now kind of will forward this.
So it's doing an aggressive, proactive spam filtering thing?
Yeah, I think this is a spam filter thing, or malware detection, I guess, where people try to kind of, before they delivered the email, check the links contained, and if they were benign, then only it would continue. So we excluded these. Also, we excluded hits from net ranges that we knew to be from like certain AV companies, right? Where like all the mail is just being sent to them, and they will analyze it and then forward it afterwards. So we try to clean up this data as best as possible. Obviously, we cannot know for certain that there was not kind of a single false positive in there.
But so then when you're doing your additional analysis, it's like I think 6 slides before this or something.
Hang on, back. This is so great.
Sorry,
it's
your own fault for having so many good slides here.
It's when you don't have your own laptop to do the presentation.
This one here. So
this one.
You've got this report not viewed.
Yes.
Does that mean like?
So this is people that did get the email, so because they were tracked, but they did not look at the report, because so basically we have like the tracking pixel hit, and we have somebody click the link on the web interface. We logged both events, and we had some people that were tracked but not click on the link and not try to contact us in any way to get any more information from our side. Does that make sense?
Okay, so the email that you sent them didn't have
It did not have all the technical details. It just said you have a misconfiguration in Git. That's pretty much it.
Right.
So, I mean, if people were kind of aware that they were using Git, they might have come up with a thought that, I need to check that. But there we didn't really give them much more technical information on the nature of the vulnerability.
Got it. Okay, thank you.
You're welcome.
Hey, Tobias Wiebig, TU Delft. Could you maybe characterize the impact of the 2 vulnerabilities you notified? Because it did not really become clear to me how bad the impact of the WordPress vulnerability was. So are we talking remote compromise, or what does it do?
So the thing is that we only looked at cross-site scriptings, which, eventually could lead to somebody hijacking the admin account, uploading PHP shells, and whatnot. Our main focus in the types of vulnerabilities was always that we could do a non-intrusive test. Because when you start exploiting a SQL injection or a command injection or something like this, to verify that it works, you need to actually exploit it. And that, at least in Germany, is already beyond ethical questions. This is illegal, period. And so also in terms of ethics, we have a whole section in the paper devoted to this. We try to look at those types of vulnerabilities that we can check for without interfering with the operation of a server. So also I wouldn't try to retrieve millions of resources, right? So really straightforward vulnerabilities. Does that answer your question?
Well, yes, so I think that can also explain the different fix rates, because as an administrator, you might be more inclined to fix something which may have actual, well, bad impact. You push credentials to Git, etc. So having a Git repository exposed usually means you're, well, having problems, while XSS.
I think just to maybe wrap up that question, definitely that's the point. Also, I think there's a difference in those people that use Git and those people that use WordPress, because everybody can use WordPress. And for Git, at least there's some technical knowledge involved, I guess. So there might be also a reason why there was different fix rates, just because people understood what we told them. Okay.
Okay.
The microphone.